So just my last encouragement, do come as far forward as possible. There's going to be stuff on the screens in quite a lot of detail, and the further you come forward, the more chance you've got of actually being able to see it.
Delighted so many people have stayed. That's encouraging and lovely. And dare I say it, you're in for a treat. We've had this presentation so far, it was at PCC. So some I know may have seen it before there, and DCCs were invited along as well. And I must say it went down wonderfully well. So I'm going to pass over now to Aidan, our architect, who is just wonderful at getting all of this across, the vision behind it, and conveys such joy and enthusiasm. It's actually just lovely. It's such a privilege working with Aidan and just catching that kind of enthusiastic bug and seeing just what a difference actually. We know that church isn't the building, it's us, it's the people. Nevertheless, to have that vision for what a transformed building can do for us and in terms of our mission, it's exciting. So with no more ado, over to Aidan, and then at the end we're going to have a Q&A, and I think Andy's going to lead on that. Thank you.
Okay, good morning everybody. Thank you for your patience in waiting to hear me talk about what we're hoping to achieve with Project Turnaround. Sorry, okay, right. I think sort of in reference to what Nick's kind words were, architects, we're working on the hardware, you are the software. And that's how I kind of view church projects, is that we're trying to do things that help you do what you need to do and help you as a family and as a church and as a community. So I'm going to take you through a series of slides which effectively illustrate what we've been proposing. They are not particularly done as a narrative to look at, but they are at the back on boards, so if you want to take a bit more time with them, I'll give you a little bit of commentary that will hopefully introduce that. So when we work with historic buildings, we generally begin by trying to understand what is precious and what's less precious and what's neutral and what might be detrimental. And by actually getting an understanding of that spectrum, we can then begin to look at what we keep, what we lose, what we need to change, and how we achieve that change. So we begin with a little diagram of the existing church in plan, which you can see up there. And you can see the towers there, and I'm standing about there. And what we're showing in red are little bits that we are talking about changing. So the red is the intervention. And then as we go into the actual proposal, in blue, you find what we're actually beginning to replace that with. So the biggest change you'll notice on that drawing is the chairs replacing pews in the nave. And that's very much about creating flexibility within this space. It works very, very well if you're looking at an altar in this context, west to east. But it doesn't work so well if you want to use it for other things and in other ways. And that's very much the driver of that big change. If I pick out some of the other highlights that we've got up there, the keen-eyed amongst you will notice a little block appearing to the west end on the outside of the building. Quite controversial. We're looking at how we can support that flexible space by actually creating a way that the doors can be opened much more permanently to get a visual link to the outside world through along the axis to the altar beyond. So we're looking at introducing a device which is called a narthex. It's an architectural term that goes back to Romanesque architecture 1,000 years ago. And it's creating a space beyond the west door as that interface with the secular world outside the church. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about this as we go through. So we have a narthex at that end. Oops, let me go back. And then further across, we're looking at bringing the choir for main services forward into the space kind of where I'm standing in front of the arch. When we looked at the acoustic drop-off you get from the choir being in the crossing or being in sanctuary beyond, it's remarkable how much sound you lose. So actually giving the facility for the choir to come forward for a general service is I think, a really important thing to do. In doing that, we're looking at creating new furniture for the choir to use for their music stands, along with a new altar to sit in this place and a new lectern that goes with it. In all of this moving forward, we're creating a slightly different series of spaces behind me further east. So you can see that the sanctuary at the moment and choir stalls beyond in the chancel are becoming a slightly separate space. So we can look at the things that we move from here can begin to be repositioned back there. Things like the pulpit would move and to sit across there, as would the brass lectern. And that's actually creating perhaps a bit more of a collegiate space, a bit more of a college chapel, a slightly separate area. You're still using it for worship, but actually it's something that you're using in slightly different ways. So you're creating that variety of facility to do things in different ways. In terms of how we reconfigure, one of the bonuses we get from that is that it doesn't always have to be arranged west to east, as you're sitting at the moment. So we've just illustrated some ways we could do it like so. So we could do things in the round, in the center of the space. We could do a fan arrangement with the focus on the south side and actually do that almost kind of as a wide angle space. I went into Malvern Priory the other day, who've just done a similar project, and that's how they're configuring themselves for their morning services. They're going for that wide angle side-on effect, which was quite interesting. And then just sort of looking at the absolute flexibility, what we call cabaret style, which is where you can actually position tables and cluster groups around it. So you can do all sorts of different things within the space, and that's the driver there. When we're configured with the chairs, normally the capacity is up in the low 300s. So we're not materially losing space from what we've got at the moment in terms of seating capacities. As we remove the pews, you'll notice that underneath them are timber boards, what we call pew islands. Underneath that is likely to be a void, ventilated to the outside world, which is why my toes were getting a little bit chilly by the end of the service this morning. Part of what we're looking at doing is replacing that as well. So going with losing the pews is creating a completely new floor surface throughout the nave, through and into the crossing, and up to the altar step if we can afford to do it. In doing that, we'd level the floors down and put in a new stone floor. I'd like to think it's a long way to go in terms of choosing stones, but a polished limestone or something like that with a very smooth, very, very refined finish would be great. You can see there we're just looking at a little bit of subtle patterning into it with this little bit of diapering, which just breaks it up a touch. The bonus of doing that is that we can put underfloor heating in as we do it. So that idea of a warm surface that you have everywhere really will help. Just to kind of keep things on that heating theme, you have the big heating pipes at the moment to the sides. That's actually quite a useful thing because you're losing energy through the windows. So we'll be replacing that with a more modern finned heating system that hugs the edges of the space, integrated with a little bit of a bench seat that runs down the sides, and then the stone that goes across. Okay, let's have a little look at the narthex. Now, when I spoke to you before and when we did our original feasibility study, we looked at different ways in which we could handle this, potentially as the glass box, potentially as something a little bit more traditional with stone arches. And we've kind of developed that conversation as we've gone into something which is a lot more about trying to create a very simple stone box with a low roof that stays below the line of the sill of the big west window. But actually what I want to try and do is float the roof of that little pavilion. And within it, we've got 3 loos, which we didn't really want to put into this space. I think if you remember in the original feasibility study, we looked at loos going into the north transept. But in order to do that, we had to create a hole to get there. So this dodges all of those bullets. We don't knock any holes in anything historic. We put our loos in a slightly more discreet place, but we make sure that the new build doesn't actually touch the old. So you can see the little tiny slots we're trying to create there, so that you've got glass between the two pieces of stone. They don't visibly touch. And where we've got the kind of arrow scores on the stonework either side of the west door, we've got space around those. So you can see the whole of the historic building. We don't mask anything with anything new that sits into that. The roof above it has got to be quite low pitch to sit below the west window. So we're looking at a copper roof that sits in there with a particular finish that goes with it, and a central circular roof light that hovers just above that entrance, just so you get a pool of light that sits there. We've also looked at how we might make the ceiling below it as a piece of laser cut timber work, actually picking up on some of the patterning of the Gothic windows that you've got, but actually doing that in a really modern material. But so you get the shadow. So from the circular roof light through the laser cut timber, we get the shadow on the stone floor. It just begins to build up those layers of texture. So some simplified CGI images just to show you how that works. So you can see that the stone is sandstone, and it sits to match in with the sandstone on the west front. Very importantly, we've tried to create this glazed clear story at high level, so the roof floats. You get to see that underside of the ceiling. And there's our circular roof light. But with the doors open, you can see right the way through to the high altar. So with our great new lighting system, at night, we've got glazed doors. The timber doors are propped open, held open. And then you could actually look at just putting pools of light on the crossing or on the altar. You can tell different stories with the seasons of the year, but it's something which becomes a lot more accessible to Solihull as a community. It opens that door and helps people to see inside the church. You can see there we've just looked at how we might integrate some calligraphy with the stonework. So if we've got this canvas of simple sandstone, we don't want it just to be kind of a dumb box. We'd like to put some detail into that. So we've looked at how we might put some text around that to begin to animate it. And my precedent for that is Ralph Bayer's amazing work at Coventry, tying back to our reference to St. Michael outside the cathedral there this morning in the sermon. Ralph Bayer's amazing text that you see in great sort of great scale of it, but carved into that sandstone. And there's a lovely quote from The Guardian, which said, this is the most significant work of British public lettering from the 20th century. That's a heck of a bar. Don't think we're probably going to be at that level, but I think it will be a lovely inspiration to take and begin to wrap this box. It's like the building wearing jewellery. We've got the stone, we've got the canvas. Let's just give it that little bit of flash of something that makes it beautiful. And that's a cross-section through it. So you can see that roof is trying to hug this low profile so we don't impact on the views of the window at all. You can see the texture of the patterning on the ceiling, the shadowing coming in through the circular roof light above, and the stone wraps inside to out. So the box, the two loos inside will be quite grand loos because they will be wrapped in sandstone. And we want that just to feel like two solid pieces of masonry. You walk through the doors, you walk through another wall of masonry, and then you're out into the outside world. Right. Coming inside, we're looking at doing more work at the west end of church. So again, we've got this flexible space, but we've got things that we'd like to integrate. So first off is looking at having a servery at that end, having the bookstalls, so that as the doors are open, we've got bookstalls in the welcome area, space for the children, and some furniture storage at that end. We want to do that in a very simple way, just taking a water line around the building and looking at filling that with timber panelling. And we've looked at trying to use a cherry timber because it gives a really good match against the sandstone. So again, it's just trying to play into that. Instinct with these things is always to go for English oak, but actually, because you've got this pinky, lovely red sandstone, If we go for that slightly redder timber in cherry, we think that could look quite nice. That can be mirrored with the chairs that we choose. We're looking at the Howe 44 chairs. If you'd like to see those in action, a day out at Worcester Cathedral, you'll see they've got quite a few of them there, and they're very nice. So there's our palette of materials. We've got the sandstone, which will come from Hollington in Staffordshire. That's the local sandstone quarry. We're looking at our plywood for the ceiling with the laser cut that sits into it to give us that patterning. We're looking for the kind of bronzed finish for the copper on the roof, and those shadowing that we'll get dropping through that to give us the pattern onto the stone floor. Inside, we've got the cherry with the panel that goes with that, bronze for the door handles, metalwork, detailing, and then this sort of slate for the worktops and those surfaces that go with them. So very subdued palette, but working with the materials you've got. Put that together, and looking as I would look from here, this is the kind of view you would have towards the west end of church, with servery on one side, bookstall, welcome area, storage, and a space for the children's area next door to that. I'm not saying that we pen the children permanently at the back. It is flexible furniture, so they can move about. As my daughter will attest, I'm quite keen on penning children in places where they can keep tidy and neat. But we'll try and be a bit more grown up than that. In terms of inspiration for how we would do this, the church where I live, at Tamworth in Arden, we've just done a project to put a server at the back at the West End. Some great architects from Hereford have done it, and if you'd like to go and have a look at how that works, drop into Tamworth. They're open pretty well every day, and just see how that works. They do lunchtime concerts and things like that where we use it. We do things like cafe church. They are extremely good at cake things, and it's just allows the whole building to become something which the village is taking to its heart a lot more. So I think that's very much our precedent for how we want to do this. We will debate long and hard about what exactly goes into your servery, but we're trying to make that something where we've got things like water on tap so that people can fill a water bottle, but we can put a little bit of microwave in there and things like that. Dishwashers, sinks, allowing you to be as flexible as we can. I'm sure things will come into it and things will go out of it as we refine it, but that's the general idea. Coming further across, we've got bookstall sitting in its location either side of the entrance, with a sound desk in there designed in the same materials, but being a little bit more flexible, so we can put that in different positions depending on how you're using it, in choreographing the space, so it can sit in its conventional west to east format, or we can actually move it so that it works if we go side on or if we go end around. We've got the flexibility that goes with that, and the sort of welcome area. So if you are going to be here welcoming people to church during the week, which we've just talked about, then this is your base that you'll be able to use. Carrying round to the north side by the north door, we have a temporary boxing around the electrical systems there. I emphasise temporary because it has got a whiff of the IKEA about it at the moment. But when we do our timber panelling from everything else, we'll be replacing that with a cherry panel that looks kind of like that. Going into the north porch, we're going for the same idea of keeping the iron gates open, putting a new glazed screen, which is a bit less domestic inside it, so that we can have that permanent visibility in, the doors held open, and again, you're looking in towards the chandelier in the centre. It just gives us that, locks us into that wider community in two directions. Working our way further east, as we come into the north transept, this was where we were trying to get our loos and all sorts of things into it in the previous iteration. That's simplified now, which lets us look at that space as perhaps being a little bit more flexible as a meeting area, but we're putting a wall of storage on one side, again in the cherry panelling, and we can integrate things like our AV system will be integrated inside that. There are currently all kinds of level changes as you go into that space, So the idea is to kind of pull that down to a slightly lower level, but actually have it flat across the space. So we'll just get a slight ramp up as we move in. Keep the screen there, but where we've got the stalls in front of the screen, they were originally on the end of the chancel choir stalls. So we'll put those back to their original location at that end. So if we look at some of the archive photos, you can see there when the old screen was in place, those return stalls, there's our choir stalls going down, they return at right angles, and it becomes much more like a college chapel. So placing those back into their original location would be part of that piece of the works. And if you look at the current choir stalls, you can see where the timber changes, where they were adapted when they were taken out first time round. Church buildings are cyclical. Things move back. Things move back. It just kind of works on a slightly glacial timeline for how it happens. We talked about moving the pulpit back. As you can see, the upper section of the pulpit is a pretty lovely piece of timber work, Jacobean. We want to keep that in an appropriate way, but placing that opposite the steps up to the upper chapel within the chancel. Again, it just gives it that sort of formality of space. And by relocating the lectern up there as well, we're just kind of creating that slightly different environment for worship, a slightly separate space that works alongside it. In this area, as I said, we're talking about potentially having a new altar to go here. So we've engaged with a really talented young local craftsman who's beginning to build a reputation for making church furniture. He's based in Kings Heath and has just done a set for the church in Northfield. He's doing one for Bourneville and will be his third commission. But he'll be looking at a new altar design and a new lectern to go with that. And of course, the music stands for the choir will be coming into this area. So trying to get that suite of furniture so it all looks as though it's come from the same hand. And Joe's starting to work with ideas around the life of Alphege and how that story might play out through the furniture, which is going to be interesting. Finishing up, if we just move into the slightly wider context, you might remember from my original feasibility study work, we looked at how we can work on the connection between church and the OBH building and how we reinforce that. As part of this phase of the works, we need to begin that connection. We won't be doing things to OBH, but we'll be looking at the landscape that begins to join them. So there we sit at the moment with our west end of church, with the paths around it. Then we've got the area of grass here, which doesn't do that much, although it is a space that people use. And then we've got the drive-through to the housing and the Oliver Bird Hall below it. What we're proposing to do is actually create a little bit more of a buffer space outside the narthex, pulling back that landscape around it. Where we've got grave markers, we keep them where they are, but we reset into the new surfaces. And then we look at a new path that can link us coming down that way. Where we've got the old churchyard wall, we break through that, and then we ramp down to the disabled parking spaces, and we ramp down to the Oliver Bird Hall. So you've got an at-grade surface. When I say ramp, what I'm trying to do is get the levels flat enough so that it isn't actually a ramp. So it's just a smooth grading of the surface you walk on. Finally, within that, we've got a little zone for a contemplation garden. So there's a flexible lawn area where you can, dare I say, kick a ball about. You can do things with it, but you've also got that slightly quieter piece of landscape space. One of the interesting things that planning law changes are doing is they're trying to encourage us to get a net gain in our biodiversity with every project that we have to do. So we've got a lovely opportunity there to look at how we can build that biodiversity in that place. There are a couple of yew trees which are big and poisonous, not particularly great specimens. We'd quite like to replace those with something a little bit more friendly to the plants and animals that live around them. We don't know whether that will happen or not. It will depend on various approvals, but it's an aspiration, and we start with the aspiration. And there's our little contemplation garden that sits on the roadside, and it just protects that open lawned area with the big oak tree and the big cedar tree sitting next to that, and the big redwood as well that goes in there. So just trying to create that third space that exists between church and hall as a landscape that you can do much more with. So there we go. In summary, hopefully, we're trying to propose a series of works that will change how you can use this space quite radically, but radically in a way that gives you flexibility to reinvent and reimagine and take your vision out to serve your wider community over the next generations, really. And with that, we're looking at the landscape that ties back to OBH and how that can come into the project as well in a subsequent phase, and how we can do more with that. So trying to get you to become a more integrated series of buildings that allow you as a church to do what you do best. Right, I think that's probably enough from me. I have got a little model, my visual aid, which if you'd like to have a look at afterwards, it's quite small scale, but do feel free to come down and have a quick look. But that begins to show you how the narthex might sit. Sorry, I'll step back onto my mark. It's very theatrical. I have a mark on the carpet where I have to stand. So that sits like that as the west end. And then, whoops, as we begin to turn it round, then you can see, looking back here, we've just got that very simple set of timber interventions that sit within the main space. But feel free to come and have a little study of that later. But shall we do Q&A?
Aidan, thank you very much. Very inspiring. Thank you very much indeed for spending your Sunday morning with us. I'm sure for those that have heard this for the first time, this is all a bit, oh, what a lot of information. And you've got hundreds and hundreds of questions. At the back of church, a lot of what Aidan put on the screen is available for you to study over the next few weeks. And feedback, that's really what we want, is for you to feedback, what do you love about this, what do you like about it, and is there anything you're not that keen on? So do feedback. The easiest way to feedback is if you're on email, please send an email to turnaround@solihullparish.org.uk. That address is on the display at the back. Or you can write to the parish office, and all that will go to the Project Turnaround Committee, who will... oh, you want me on the camera? Hello, those online. Yeah. Okay. So either write or email, and please do give your feedback. The danger with people giving feedback is that we only get feedback from those that don't like it. So if you do like it, please take the time to email as well. Or there may be things you like and things you don't. This is not going to happen tomorrow. This is a long-term vision and a long-term project. Phase 1 was the lighting. This is phase 2. And phase 3 will be looking how we can make the parish centre, incorporating the Olive Bird Hall, more welcoming, more accessible, and more hospitable. And also making sure that we're improving our eco-credentials. At the moment, out of the parishes in Birmingham Diocese, we are the third highest net contributor to our carbon. So we've got a long way to go. The lights have helped. We're getting better. But if we can get this underfloor heating, that'll enormously help as well. What's the best we could hope for? Well, we could potentially get the permissions over the next 6 to 9 months, let's say. We could potentially be going out to tender sometime next year, and towards the end of next year to 2026, maybe we could get some of this done, if not all of it. And I'm sure you're saying, so how much does it cost? Well, I don't know. We're employing a quantity surveyor over the next few months who will go through the details of these plans and itemise exactly what costs what. Let's say, for the sake of argument, round figures, £1 million. Just say for them. Your next question then is, so where's that coming from, Andy? Well, lots of sources. There are grants for things like this, particularly, people that want to put facilities like WCs in churches, particularly for underfloor heating. There's lots of grant-making organisations. Not many of them give lots and lots of money, but the National Lottery does, and there's the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So we will look at all that grant funding. We will look at, benefactors and legacies, and there's potential for, individual giving, particularly for particular pieces of this. Somebody might like to give us the altar, somebody might like to give us a lectern, somebody might like to give some choir stalls, somebody might like to build Fran a bookstall. So, there's lots of potential there for individual giving. Actually, we could do this quite simply. If everybody that gives at the moment increased their giving by a tenner a week, we'd have it done. Okay, that's a big ask. But it's not without, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that we could get this done. And if we can't get it all done at once, well then, we'll just have to do it bit by bit. The danger with that is how do we get the underfloor heating without, doing that whole thing. That's the one thing we'd really like to make that step up to do. So, by all means, send your questions to that email address that I've mentioned. If there are any burning questions or clarifications that you want now, while Aidan is here, I'll bring the microphone round, and if anybody's brave enough that's got a question, please do ask now.
Did you say there'd be toilets integrated at the back?
Yes, I did. 3. One accessible one and two standard ones.
Thank you. And will the font be moved?
No. Last time we looked at it, we did talk about moving the font to the north side, but we're keeping the font where it is now.
So the font prior to 1959 used to be in the northwest corner, and actually if you look on the floor, you can see the stonework where the font used to be, and it was moved in 1959 to there. You could say it's a little bit in the way of a flexible space, but it is a crucial part of our liturgical setup here that you have font and altar. You're moving from the secular to the sacred, and we think it's a really, and Nick has helped with this as well, really important part of our liturgical function, that this is a church. It happens to be the third biggest venue in Solihull, but it's a church. Other questions?
Will the Golden Eagle lectern be retained anyway?
Yes. We were going to locate that back in the chancel. As I noticed when Susan was reading this morning, it is quite a high, no disrespect, it is quite high up. And it's difficult to project over. Yeah. So what we wanted to do was actually look at how we can use the chancel steps that we've got. So we buy in a little bit of natural level change in the topography of the building back there, so that we aid that. So with maybe one step, placing it a step lower, we can make that work in the chancel. But it's a grand beast, and it would be a shame to lose it.
Just a quick question regarding what's on the internet, because that is going on live at the moment. Is that going to stay there so we can go back and look on the internet of what was done today?
Yes, thank you. If you all rush home and go on the Solihull Parish homepage, you will see that there are 4 documents. There's something called the design narrative, which is basically what we've put together with our architects, which is about an 18-page document with many of these slides in that design narrative. So that's got words and pictures. There is also something called the Statement of Needs, which is also in most of the Statement of Needs is actually in October's Parish Magazine. So as you go out, you can get the Parish Magazine, and the Statement of Needs is in there, but it's also on the website. There is also something called a Statement of Significance, which is quite a long document talking about the history of this church and its significance nationally. It is a Grade 1 listed building. That means it's in a few of the most precious buildings in the country. And so we have to be very sensitive and careful about what we do in this building. And that Statement of Significance will take you through and tell you things like the candelabrum was given by the Holbeach family in 1706. The pulpit there actually used to be there and was moved in 1963. And actually the pulpit before that was there. So the pulpit's moved several times and it's interesting information like that. There's also a detailed report on the pews for those that are interested and the significance of some of the pew ends. There's also much more detail. So the Statement of Significance, Statement of Needs, Design Narrative, and the final one for those that are really into detail is there's a pack of drawings, architectural drawings there, and you can see all the detail that Aidan and his colleagues have put together for us. And there will be the link to this morning's presentation. At the moment is on the homepage somewhere, not quite sure where it is. It will go in that section of four documents, and then there'll be a link to this morning's presentation, which you can rerun at leisure. Nick.
I'll come down and then I can speak to people online as well. So I was asked this morning after the 8 o'clock service, do we have a booklet of these plans? And I explained that we did have a booklet which was of the original plans, when there was going to be a hole through there and all sorts of other things. Now would be premature because we are obviously asking for feedback, and that might have a bearing, so there may be some changes to what's being proposed. We're also in the process of consulting with the Diocesan Advisory Committee, which itself informs the Chancellor. Ultimately, we have to have what's called faculty, which is the Church's planning permission for anything we do internally. Anything external, not only as we look at the narthex, not only would we need that, but we'd also need planning, of course, from Solihull Borough Council. So, when we have approval and a clear idea of, all the detail, then it might well be that we'd look at producing another booklet. I think we'd need to do that in terms of gaining funds from other sources and so on. At the moment, there is no booklet, as I say, but there's all these drawings, there's all sorts of information out there. A design narrative, as you say. So we do have what I think we need to reflect. And the main thing I wanted to explain was not just that we don't have a booklet yet and why, but really just to point out that this is genuinely a consultative exercise. We really do mean it when we say that we want to hear your thoughts, your feedback. And as I say, we'll also be receiving that from the diocese. We went through a similar process in Coleshill, where I was the rector there, and the plans evolve, and it would be surprising. I absolutely think what we've got now is a really great set of plans. I'm enthusiastically behind them as we go to all this sort of consultative exercise. But if there were no changes at all, I'd be amazed. That's just a reality.
And I think anecdotally, whenever I do this exercise, and it's my day job, it always gets better. One of you will say something really bright that none of us have thought of, and something really good will come out of the exercise. It invariably happens. So as Nick says, expect evolution, but that evolution with your input as well will no doubt be positive.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments, and everybody wants to go and have their lunch, then big thank you again to Aidan, and particularly for the model which Aidan built himself in his garage. So thank you ever so much, Aidan. Thank you for coming this morning, and thank you for your inspiration.
Thank you.